Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. We are chatting today about the 5 ways to identify your triggers and decrease parent meltdowns. This is such a great topic, and I cannot wait to dig in with Carolina. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you, Holly, for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I'm just so excited to be here today.
Yay, I'm so glad that you're on today. And so I'm going to introduce you. So Carolina Ramirez is a Latina licensed psychotherapist and parent coach. She specializes in supporting parents of neurodiverse children and has worked with individuals and families experiencing a variety of concerns. Carolina also has a 9-year-old neurodiverse son, which I love. I think that gives us a really nice perspective.
Yes, thank you. I agree.
We are talking about something that could bring up a lot of feelings today, and it's an important topic. Parents are human, right? I am very, very human, Carolina. Everybody listening.
We both are very human.
We're both very human. And even though we serve this population and we have children that are differently wired, that doesn't mean that we're perfect. And so this is a great topic today for parents and therapists and educators, everybody, really, because identifying our triggers and decreasing our own meltdowns is a beautiful, beautiful thing. All right, let's dive into number 1, which is be curious about your own triggers, because we talk a lot about our child's triggers or the student's triggers or our client's triggers, but we have to really think about our own. Why do they come up for us? Why do we experience these really uncomfortable physiological reactions where it's like we just, whoa, it can get really, really big fast.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love how you are framing that question as being curious about those triggers. And so we talk about triggers with our children, but we sometimes forget to think about what triggers us as parents. And so one example that I love to give is that I don't like being late. So for me, being late is a huge trigger. And that really comes back from, as a child, we were always late to many activities, many events. And it always made me feel bad if we were, rescheduled or had to leave and not join the activity because we were late. And so for me as a parent, when we're late to school or we're late to an appointment, I get really anxious. And so I know that, it's a trigger for me because I get anxious and it basically spirals me in a way that affects my behavior. And so I become really short, I can get more agitated more quickly with my child. And so really being curious about how those triggers are coming up for you and why and where they come from is really important, because it's going to directly impact how you manage yourself in those moments. And it could be, a moment of just being late, or it could be a moment where there's more difficulty and more stress in your life. So that is really the first point to really identifying what are those triggers and why are they coming up for me.
And I like the word curious as well, because I think it takes off the shame that sometimes parents, we're supposed to all have it together. We're supposed to be able to think and into the future. We're supposed to manage our own self. We're supposed to be able to regulate our emotions on a dime. It doesn't really work that way, because again, we're human. beings, and we need to start there. And again, being curious instead of blaming ourselves, feeling bad, all the things that can come up for us. And I appreciate you sharing your experience of fear of being late. I struggle because I'm often late, is what I was thinking. That would probably drive you crazy. So thinking about what comes up for you, often and again, I'm curious, and I notice the back talk for me brings up this physiological reaction, right? This idea of disrespect, even though who even knows what that really means, but the idea of what that looks like, and how when my child engages in those types of behaviors, my heart races, my breathing changes. Those are the types of things that trigger me, just blatantly saying, not doing it, or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be really a way to impact our emotions and our physiological, again, reactions. It can come on, and it can come on fast. So definitely number one, be curious about those triggers. If you're not sure about what those triggers are, just step back and see what happens. Don't judge yourself. Don't be mean to yourself. Just notice, just gently notice what comes up for you in your experience with your child, and really others. This isn't just with our children. This is what is happening with our body when we're interacting with other people. And then you can really notice.
That's right.
Which is great.
Yeah. And I love how you said, do it without judging yourself, because that's really key. Just doing it in a loving and compassionate way, so that you can allow yourself to just really be the observer, and just allow yourself to change what you need to change in order to show up how you want to show up for your child.
Exactly. And so you touched on this earlier, which is, where do these come from? Like, triggers don't come from nowhere. They don't all of a sudden come out of the clear blue sky. They are there. They are typically set in early on. And most of that has to do with our own childhoods, our own upbringing. I find that most of the time, that's where our triggers are really coming from. What do you think?
That's right. I agree with that. I feel that a lot of times the self-talk that we're having in our minds that is contributing to the behavior and how we're reacting or responding to our children comes from our own childhood. So, were you allowed to talk back to someone? Were you allowed to express yourself? And if you weren't, a lot of times you feel like you need to continue to parent that way. And so it really does bring out the parts of us that when we were children, we weren't allowed to do. So we feel like we have to follow what our parents said, or what our family said, what our culture said, what society is telling you to do. And so it's really difficult sometimes to go against the grain of what is really been your experience as a child and how you were parented. But it's important that you take that pause and be curious about where that is coming from, so that then you can then say, like, is this something that I want to continue to do?
Exactly. And so it really, again, curious is the word of the day. So I want us to think about that again with no judgment. And you had given Carolina a great example of how your family was late, and that brought up a lot of stress for you. And even as a young person, you may have said, I am not going to be late when I get older.
Exactly. That is exactly what I told myself.
So that ended up being a value for you now. We can, when we're younger, we have these ideas of how we're going to parent differently, but sometimes the way we were parented still really sneaks up in these triggers. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely does. And I think it takes a cultivating awareness, right, of how these are coming up for us. Because when we were younger, we had a vision of what we were going to be like as parents. And so a lot of times those visions came from doing the opposite of what our parents were doing. And so when we find ourselves as parents now, we sometimes are like, why am I acting the same way that my parents were acting when I specifically had this vision or had told myself that I'm not going to do that? And so I think it's just really taking the moment to pause and reflect on what is triggering those things, and asking yourself, how is this helpful to me in this moment? And if it is not helpful to you, because if your child is having a meltdown and then you're having a meltdown as well, are you going to be able to overcome the situation or get through the situation in a way that you feel that you're connecting with your child? And so really is asking yourself, like, how is it that I want to connect with my child, and let that set the intention and just really drive how you respond or react to a situation.
Very good. Because it doesn't have to be that way. You may
Correct.
have this feeling that's coming up for you, but that doesn't also need to control your behavior. Because we talk about this with our kids all the time.
Yes.
Yes. But they're also human and we're human.
Absolutely.
This all humanness thing is really inconvenient, right?
Yes.
At the same time, it allows us to be kind and understanding to ourselves. So number three, part of, now that we've kind of gotten curious and identifying our triggers and maybe identifying where they could have come from, often, our own childhood, the ideas of what we thought we would do differently, and being kind to ourselves during this entire process, which isn't easy. Number three, like just really reframing and rewriting these old narratives that, don't serve us anymore. And when I think about this, I can't help but start a sentence with "no wonder." And for me, that opens up a door of curiosity, self-forgiveness, forgiveness of ourselves when we mess up, understanding of our kids and what they do and say. Is no wonder I would have this physiological reaction when my oldest son talks back, because if I would have talked back growing up, I think my clothes would have been out on the front lawn.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm not even exaggerating.
Yeah.
So, no wonder. And I love starting a no wonder. What do you think about that?
I love that too. Yeah. I think it really, again, brings back to our first point of being curious. And so when we look at things from a place of curiosity, we're much more open to allowing things to be what they are instead of what we think they should be, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. And so really asking yourself, what are the stories that I'm telling myself about this situation or how I'm parenting my child? And so when you're looking back at those stories and really being aware of the stories that you're telling yourself, it will directly impact how you respond or you react to your child when they're talking back, or if they're hitting someone, or if it takes you more than once to tell them to do something. And so these are all things that, when we were children, we were not allowed to do those things, like you said, so a lot of times it will bring up for us, those expectations that were set for us as children, and that we sometimes feel like that's how it has to be carried on with our children. So reframing that so that you can have a better understanding. And one of the best ways and practices that I use to reframe is journaling. I am a, big journaler. I think journaling and getting your thoughts out on paper and just like letting go of judgment, just letting those thoughts come through and just really being an observer of like what it is that I'm telling myself in these moments and seeing how that is impacting how I'm responding or reacting to my child is really impactful. And so once you get an understanding of how and where those stories came from, it really allows you to say, is this really working for me? And if it's not working for you, then how can I change that so that I can meet the actual vision of how I want to parent my child? And it allows you to also create that vision for your child. And so when you create that vision of how you want to meet your child and how you want to respond, it allows you to do your daily routines with intention. And so it takes practice. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And it's just kind of like a muscle that we build. And so, like you said, we're human, we're not perfect, we're going to make mistakes. But as long as you're continuously trying to really be self-aware, it's going to make an impact and a difference in how your relationship is forming with your child or children.
Exactly. And I like that you brought up journaling. For those of you who do that, I think that's wonderful. I am not a journaler. I am the person that has index cards and Post-its and things kind of everywhere. So yes. Journaling is not my thing, but I will tell you, I have a very brief window in my car. After I get my oldest off to school, drop off the youngest, I've got a few minutes before I get to work, and I will talk to myself. Yeah. I will talk it out. And I'm sure that's interesting at stoplights when people are next to me, because I get passionate and really like, whoa, what was my experience? Like, for instance, this morning, my child, this is going to wrap us into understanding our own experience is not our child's experience. Number 4, he is probably the loudest walker of all walkers in history. We've got, I thought it was cute and it didn't really work for us, but I got these just on Amazon picture frames and put them in our hallway with pictures of our family, of the boys. And every time he walks down the hall, which is, I don't know how many 100 times, because he also likes to pace, the pictures are sideways, right? About to fall off the wall. And I thought it was interesting this morning when I was walking in the kitchen and he snapped at me and said, "I'd really appreciate it if you walked more quietly. That's really annoying." And so I noticed these big feelings were coming up, because there's the back talk.
Yeah.
But also kind of interesting because he's the loud walker.
Yeah.
Of the family, right?
Right.
But I really had to understand his experience in that moment. He probably was still tired. He didn't have his breakfast yet, so he was probably hungry. He may have been more sensitive to the sound or the vibration of the floor in that moment. And it wasn't about him, lashing out at me that was bringing up those feelings. It was bringing up those feelings like, wait a minute, hold up, you're the loud walker. I mean, I could have turned around and said that, but that's not his experience in that moment. And that really wasn't going to move us in the direction of, I want him to have a great school day. I don't want this to be about us arguing about who walks heavier in the morning. Right?
Yes. And I love how you did that, because you set the intention of what you wanted to happen. So you wanted him to have a good morning and send him off to school in a positive way. So you paused and you reflected and you realized what the intention was that you wanted. So it didn't turn into this back and forth between you and him.
Now I wanted to, Carolina.
Yeah.
I wanted to be like, right? Because it was bringing up big feelings for me. But all because it brings up feelings does not mean that needs to control your actions. And again, we talk about this with our kids all the time. We have the ability in our frontal lobe, we have the ability to break down this internal checklist to think about what we want to say and do next.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use that ability to be kind to ourselves, think through our decisions. What would be the impact of the decision if I would have said to him, no, you're not going to talk to me like that, and you're the one who walks heavy. This would have ended up in an argument, and that's not the kind of relationship I want with him.
Right.
Yes, I experienced discomfort. Yes, I wanted to snap at him. Yes, I'm human. I'm going to experience all those things. I know that's a trigger for me when he talks back to me like that. But that I had a choice in that moment. I had a choice. What am I going to do next? My parents don't have a say in what I decide to do right now. I'm an adult, right? I can say and do what I feel like my differently wired child needs, period. So despite any feeling I have in my body at that moment, and it's a beautiful skill that we have, it's not easy to regulate ourselves in that moment. But what I can do is think about later when we're both calm and say, you know what, I noticed, that this kind of big thing was coming up for me. And I was feeling annoyed, but I also understood that that was hard for you in that moment too. What I was doing was upsetting to you. Because
I love that.
he doesn't have the executive functioning to always go through that checklist and think before he says things. So if we're honest with ourselves as parents, as adults, we want to say things that are unkind sometimes, not because we're mean, not because we're trying to create problems,
right,
but because we're experiencing something that's really difficult and uncomfortable. And we just want it to stop. But really, when we use that ability that we're born with, that executive functioning, we're able to see into the future. I can talk to him about this later. It is not the time right now. And if I did talk with him in a way where I wanted to discuss it right then, he wasn't in a place to hear me.
Right.
So I think we really need to, again, number 4, understand our child's experience, our student's experience, our client's experience, and know that it's not our experience. My husband and I were taking a walk, very rare that we were able to do that this morning. And we were talking about how we sometimes experience big feelings when maybe the kids aren't prioritizing their schoolwork or their extracurricular activities. So we're both like, go, 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 want to do it all, want to do it well. And that doesn't mean they don't want to do things well, but they may not do things in the way that we did them. That doesn't mean they're wrong, and it doesn't mean we're wrong. It just lets us be curious. Of no wonder that would be a big feeling for us if they maybe had a lower grade on a test or decided to behave in a way that we didn't feel comfortable with. But that's their experience. So once we look at it and take a step back, their behavior is often not personal to us at all.
Absolutely.
And we don't have to force our own expectations and experiences on them. They're not us. Just like we wouldn't want someone else to put their expectations and decide whether we're good or not based on what they think. So it's a lot to unpack. But I think if we get curious and kind and loving and non-judgmental to ourselves and our kids and our students and our clients, this can look really different. Our relationships, our communication can look a lot different.
Absolutely. And I love how you said that, because it really gives us permission to hold space for both experiences. And I think that's something that we could start practicing a little bit more, because I think sometimes we're just, like you said, on the go, go, go. And so we're so in this state of reaction, right? But when we allow ourselves to know that there's space for both, that I can hold both of these experiences and they're both true, it gives you a compassionate look on, how they are experiencing this moment and what their behavior is. And then also allowing you to give yourself that self-compassion as well, to say, this is how I'm feeling right now. And it's okay. Like, I'm not going to judge myself for feeling this way. I'm not going to be my harshest critic, which a lot of times we are. But just really being the observer, right? And just saying like, oh yeah, so I could see how that bothered him in this moment. But I also feel like that was disrespectful to say that to me. So those are both true in the moment. And when we see that, we can respond to them in a way that's not going to perpetuate, some of these back and forths that we can get into with our kids that are not helpful and that cause, rifts in our relationships with them.
I think that's so true, because we are in a position to make that change. Like we were talking about earlier, I didn't grow up. Can't imagine if my dad or mom are listening to this right now, but we get raw and real in this podcast.
That's
Sorry,
right.
but this is true. I didn't grow up in houses, my mom and dad were divorced, where you could really speak your mind or communicate your feelings. I was told kids are supposed to be seen and not heard, like literally told that. So, for me, it's very different when you have a child who doesn't have that internal checklist, who will say what they're feeling and what they're thinking in that moment, because in society that's often considered rude, or we don't do that, or that's backtalk or whatever. But I also have to remind myself that I want them to tell me what's happening for them.
Yes.
I want that for them. I want them to feel comfortable saying what's on their mind. I don't want them to have to pretend like I did.
Absolutely. And I think that is a very generational thing, what you experience as a child, that children are to be seen and not heard. And I think that is a lot of the reason why sometimes we have our parent meltdowns, is because we weren't necessarily allowed to have our emotions expressed as children. And so they're coming up for us as adults. It's like, oh my gosh, you're talking back. Like, how dare you talk back to me like that? Like, I'm your mother. And so I think it really is a beautiful thing that in this generation, we're really becoming more respectful of our children and just allowing them to express themselves emotionally. And by doing so, when we allow them to do that, we're modeling for them that it's okay to express yourself and to have your needs heard. And then we can work together to figure out how that's going to work best for us in our relationship as parent and child. And so, it's really is a beautiful thing that our children are allowed to express themselves and tell us how they're feeling or what's on their mind.
Exactly. I love that. The last one, and again, this was sort of wrapped up in what we were saying, but number 5, be kind to yourself. I know I say this a lot, but it's true. Like you said, Carolina, we are our worst critics. I'm a bad parent. I'm doing everything wrong. They're disrespectful. This sort of judgment that comes out of us being human and our triggers and our experiences as children ourselves, all these big feelings will come up. And if we're able to step back, be curious, and like you mentioned earlier, observe, which is a wonderful word, with curiosity and love and kindness, it really can change everything. It can change your relationship with your child. It can change your relationship with what you might still be dealing with in your own childhood.
Absolutely. You know, I am a big advocate of using self-compassion towards yourself. And it's because we did grow up sometimes listening to, you know, our parents telling us to not speak, not to express ourselves. And so sometimes when we start having these big feelings come up for us, we're sometimes pushing those feelings away. And so what happens is that it translates into us just reacting instead of really taking that pause and reflecting on the perspectives of both of the individuals that are in that interaction, right? Or in that experience. So when you're kind to yourself, you're allowing yourself to forgive yourself for any mistakes that we do, because we are human, as we said. So we do make mistakes, but it also allows you to grow from there. If you're always just judging yourself and being hard on yourself, it really, you know, we have this like twisted notion in our society that like the harder that we are on ourselves, the better I'm going to become, and I'll do better the next time. But the research shows that when when you have self-compassion for yourself and you tell yourself, I'm doing the best that I can in this moment, or I'm doing the best that I can with what I know. And, you know, once we know better, we can do better. And so again, and really allowing yourself the time and the process that it takes, because it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to be something that's going to continuously take practice, and that you allow yourself to make mistakes, because when we make mistakes, that's how we learn. And so really just allowing the space to reframe that judgmental, harsh inner critic in you and say to yourself, you know, it's not that I'm not good enough or I'm not a good enough parent, is that I am doing the best that I can. You know, and I'm going to send myself love and give myself a hug and a pat on the back, because this is hard work. You know, it's actually harder to do self-compassionate work on yourself and to also hold space for your children and their experiences, because typically speaking, it's just easier to just do what your parents did. So for the parents that are really looking to do things differently, it's actually a really difficult shift that we have to make, but it is worth it in the end if you're looking to have connection with your children and really just kind of like self-regulate yourself. It'll help you to self-regulate yourself so you're not like having a parent meltdown.
Exactly. And you know, there's so many great things about this. And like you said, forgiving yourself, understanding your own experience and where that came from. But that's also being a wonderful model for your child or your student. Because if you can say, that was hard for me, if you can show them communication, of course, appropriately, that it's okay to make mistakes. Or if you make a mistake, then say you're sorry. That's okay for parents to do, right? Even though maybe we grew up in
Yes.
a different way. That was really hard for me. I think I was tired. I think I was hungry. I think I was stressed from work, and I snapped at you. And I'm sorry for that. I mean, what a lovely
Right.
way to show self-regulation, how you can understand how stressors build, and then take ownership of your own behavior. So, you know, being kind to yourself really impacts everything. It's a beautiful thing. I agree. So
Absolutely.
Carolina, thank you so much for coming on today. I think this is a really powerful episode that I'm hoping that our watchers and listeners really benefit from. And I'm sure they also want to learn more about you and your services. So tell us how they can do that.
Sure. So the best way to reach me is my website, at www.carolinaramirez.com. And you can also connect with me on Instagram at Carolina Ramirez, LCSW. And so, yeah, that's really the best way to reach me is through the website. There is a contact me form that you can fill out, or my email address is on there as well. Or if you want to connect with me on Instagram, you can send me a private message through there and connect with me that way.
Wonderful. And again, thanks so much. I know a lot of our watchers and listeners are going to want to reach out to you.
Thank you so much, Holly. This was such a pleasure and joy to do today.
Okay, you take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.